let's talk about Israel, Palestine. Um, Ankur, I'm going to give you the first question really quickly, and I'm just going to hit it out there. I just want you to let me know, where do you stand on the Israel-Palestinian situation right now? It's very interesting, and we're going to be talking about Modi and his election later on. But I've always liked Modi's kind of like way he plays this, right? Like he's a friend to Israel. He's close with their government. Everything's cool. They have that relationship. But a lot of the UN votes, he also votes to condemn a lot of the treatment of the Palestinians. So he's kind of got this interesting way of playing both sides, where it's like, hey man, we're cool with each other. We don't want to lock horns and knock horns with Israel. We don't want to get caught having them finger wag at us. But we also want to let you know what you got going on over there. And you can see this by some of his old school votes in the UN. It's not cool. So where do you stand in this Israel-Palestinian situation too, as well as being a person who's active in the community as a organizer and whatnot?
I just start with a long, consistent ceasefire leading to a solution with Palestinian state, Israeli state.
Yeah.
I think, just talking about it, the two-state solution,
yeah,
right? Is that even feasible? And right off the bat, depending on where you're at, the nuance causes people to take sides. And that's where, again, as you say, India, largest weapons purchaser of Israel,
yes,
and yet still votes against him at the UN in favor of Palestinian rights, right? There is a pathway. You got to try to imagine it. What is that pathway to diplomacy? And it is very hard to see in the middle of this situation without a ceasefire.
Yeah.
And
so wait a second. You said India is the biggest. They buy more Israeli weapons than any other country right now. Is that what you're saying?
I saw that somewhere. I'm sure
it's not the reverse. Three. It's not Indian weapons being sold to the Israelis to use. It's India buying weapons from Israel that they probably don't even use that much, if anything. They just got them on hand, right? So okay. What about the occupation?
And I go back to the United Nations, right? The United Nations and that body, right? If you go again back to the history, the 5 permanent members, right? The ones that have vetoes.
Yeah.
India decided not to take one of those seats so it could have the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Right. You look back at some of the diplomacy and the history of India at the United Nations, Nehru, and many people would criticize him as being a colonial puppet, right?
Yeah.
And the way that, or an apologist for the colonial regime, and then the Mughal Empire before that, right? And so there's a lot of history there where the United Nations and India's non-aligned movement is not just Modi, right? It's carried, even if you disagree with Nehru, if you disagree with, there's that arc throughout the history. And Jay Shankar, the Minister of External Affairs, the MEA of India right now, he's the one who's steering that and giving conversation. Modi ji is just, answering. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know what the relationship is. And Joe Biden and Tony Blinken, right? What are they talking, and what is Tony Blinken leading on, and how is he in that same way? India's got 1 billion people. It's got a complex political situation, and it's not just Prime Minister Modi leading everything. This Minister of External Affairs, Jay Shankar, if you haven't heard him or paid attention to him, he's definitely somebody who's helping to thread that needle and move India forward while in this tumultuous.
I think India does have that kind of same perspective too. A lot of people think Russia, everything's Putin, but they don't look at some of their cabinet members and what that, how they feel, what they've, spoke about when they go out. They have their own opinions, their own objectives, their own way of doing things. It's a collective government. It's not just one guy. And sometimes people can think of that about Modi too as well, but there's a lot of moving parts. Do you think that along with a ceasefire that Israel needs to end the occupation as far as the West Bank, as far as Gaza? Where do you feel about as far as them with their occupation?
Yeah, that's it depends on. Yeah, yes, I'm against occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question from the two perspectives is which side is occupying which land, right? The specific settlements in the West Bank, right? And if you look at the map, the checkpoints and the way that now the United States has put sanction on some of these sheep farmers, shepherd farmers, right? They went into specific parts of the West Bank with IDF supported, not really farmers, but they gave them acres and acres of land to serve as points to take more land. And so that's what you're looking at. This is a civilizational battle that's gone on for millennia, where acres of land are fought for with blood and whatever tools are at your side's disposal. And so that's what's lost, right? In from us in America talking about, and me again as an American citizen what influence do I have? But talking about what's going on in these other places, just recognizing that actors in those places with more extreme views than me on both sides are battling it out for acres of land in a legitimate, I'm right, they're wrong. With their side supporting, with international opinion lining up one way or the other, where again it's who's an arbiter, who can actually do diplomacy in this situation, or are we doomed to continued escalation and war?
Well, I definitely think that even though there were some legitimate critiques or points of view from some of the Israeli folks, the way they've handled this whole thing, especially with the support of the United States, using the weaponry, using their say-so to do whatever they want to expand some of these settlements. And even though there was a legitimate gripe, I think it's all out the window now, especially with the way they've handled this, this war. They have something called the Dahaya Doctrine, which allows them to almost like carpet bomb. They call it mowing the lawn, right? And all the civilians and women. So I think that any argument that Israel has right now is, not legitimate, especially since a lot of those the Jewish people that are living there now, that are getting some of the settlements, they're not even Sephardic Jews. They're Ashkenazi. They're from Europe. They're from Brooklyn, for crying out loud, a lot of them. So it is a crazy situation. But let's go into some of the stuff that's happening right now, just so we can get a little bit more of a perspective on what is happening. Israel ground forces have now entered into Rafah, right? That's the first thing we need to talk about.
That just happened?
This happened yesterday. Within the last 24 hours, they are now in there. They did their carpet bombing. This is kind of a little concerning because they had moved a majority. You can put the article up real quick from antiwar.com. They had moved and they had told people to move in towards Rafah because they were doing their bombing campaign north. And now they're bombing a lot of these people who are trapped there with nowhere to go. So now it says, the report says Israel is trying to take control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah boarding process. Israel tanks have entered Rafah and appear to be pushing to capture the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing that connects Egypt. Several media outlets have reported heavy airstrikes have been reported in the city as well, with some media reports describing it as, once again, here we go, carpet bombing, although the scale of destruction and death toll is unclear at this time. Now, we just had a situation where we have been bombing, we've been allowing the bombing to happen. In other words, I always make the analogy of when we hear this kind of lip service from the Biden administration, right? And we're going to hear it right now from Mr. Kirby, that we hear this, we're very concerned about what Israel is doing. It's like and yet we're providing the weapons nonstop. We just sent more weapons over there. I always say the analogy is like it's a best friend telling his boy, you need to stop beating your wife so much, but then he hands his friend a thicker belt to do so. Would you agree or disagree at this point that we are partially to blame for the destruction in Gaza and the killing of so many civilians?
I'll go back to your favorite person, Bernie Sanders, who on the Senate floor said we are at this ridiculous situation where humanitarian aid from the United States is not being allowed in because of the military aid that we are providing Israel. He said this on the U.S. Senate. So that analogy is right. This is what's going on. And again, you have somebody who's saying this, but is it, in this vacuum of or not even vacuum, this hurricane of information that's going on everywhere. And take a step back, looking at it from, say, a strategic, an objective perspective, even in my head, unfortunately, I risk, right? The board game where you're taking territory. Rafah crossing, of course, they were going for that. That was, now in hindsight, maybe in the middle of it, I didn't realize it, but that was their objective. I don't know if now that they have that quickly, now they've been for 3 months, 6 months negotiating a ceasefire. I don't know what other military objectives, realistic ones, right? They're the initial they said they're going to exterminate Hamas. We know we can't. That's not going to happen. That was
never going to happen.
It was a ridiculous idea. It's waging a war on an abstract idea like terrorism, allowing you an
war on terror,
right? And so that was the cover. The hostages was the real negotiation. And now that they have Rafah, the crossing, I can see a ceasefire kind of moving forward now that they've gotten all of their objectives and they've pushed the limits of the entire global community. And finally, you're getting mumbling words out of the United States government to say that no, we don't agree with this. But okay, let me go ahead and do this real quick.
Let's play John Kirby real quick, because once again, listen,
I'm sad about laughing about it, but it's
just so ridiculous.
It's
but,
so ridiculous.
Yes, and to be fair too, as well, Bernie Sanders used the Hamas excuse, just like the Squad and all this other stuff, not understanding the history of Hamas, who started Hamas, who funded Hamas. This is something that the libertarians have been there for. My libertarian brothers and sisters who are so bad on economics, but are great when it comes to geopolitics, the people like Dave Smith, the people like Clint Russell, Scott Horton, who've talked about this. Hamas, they talked about Ron Paul years ago on the floor of Congress saying Israel funded Hamas. Israel supported Hamas. I think I even have something here for you. Let me give you this. And this is once again, this is the thing I couldn't stand when it came to Bernie Sanders and the Squad repeating these things. Let me see if I got this here really quickly.
So I just had Hamas, but also the Palestinian Authority. The more you look at the PA and how that is a tool of Israel to give some false opposition, it's again the communication, the information that gets out there is biased.
Let me see if I can open this up. It's not letting me do this.
Can I show John Kirby while you're looking for that?
Play John Kirby while I find this. Go ahead.
We've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. During his call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the president again made this clear. He also made clear that we continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome while securing the release of those hostages. And as I said, those conversations continue. We've made clear.
All right, so let me just say this much. Okay, and this is it right here. This is Netanyahu. It says it right here in plain and simple. Let me make it a little bit bigger, see if that works. Oh, I think that's the way it says right here. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state to support bolstering Hamas, transferring money to Hamas, he told anyone who wants to thwart establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. He told us at a meeting of the Lou Kids Party and the Knesset members in March 2019. This is part of the strategy to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. And that was Bibi Netanyahu who said that. Okay? So even the fact that you hear Bernie Sanders and the Squad members and all these other people talking about Hamas, we've seen this for quite some time. It was the Israeli state. They first started supporting it when they wanted to have an adversary government to Yasser Arafat's PLO, that secular government. So that's what they did. They supported the most radical group out there that they can use an excuse to manufacture consent for their bombing. Combine that with what we just saw from John Kirby over here, when they're acting like it's Israel that is willing to accept a ceasefire. Hamas just accepted a ceasefire. They wanted to, but they're once again they're throwing a red herring. They're bait and switching. Sullivan acted this way. Kirby's acted this way. They're acting like the Israeli governments are the ones of common sense, of practicality, willing to make a deal. Their own people are pissed off because they have hostages there. It's Hamas that's willing to make the deal, not the Israelis. And that's something that's really disgusting when we see this in our mainstream media, when we see it with this Biden warmongering cabinet. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've been giving Israel cover to do what it wants to do for a long time. And in this iteration, in this incarnation of Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, pushing, and we talked about this earlier offline, but I see him as somebody who's aiming to leave his mark on history, right? Get whatever land I can for the Israeli state, for the Jewish people, and move the page, right? Like, he doesn't care about.
So you believe it's about getting land then too, and to make that happen, you either get rid of those people or ethnically cleanse it.
Well, he's doing one or the other, right? Like,
you could do doing both simultaneously, getting rid of people to get that land, right? I mean, they're not going to leave.
and so that's where it stands, right? That the Israeli government and this complex Knesset and the parliamentary system and the way that they vote has voted not just Benjamin Netanyahu into power, but a whole range of people in that government who are I haven't heard of very many people. Yeah, there's some protests against it, but again, around the hostages, but not like there was the protests around the judicial reforms that he was able to implement over whatever protest was going on. And so now with those judicial reforms in Israel, he's got a very strong hold on all the mechanisms and levers of that Israeli government, that state power, that apparatus, which is very powerful, and leveraging it across the world. Even getting whatever small islands, Fiji, whoever, to vote on their side once in a while. So you look at where does it go from here? I mean, and again, using Hamas, PLO, Palestinian Authority, using the different Palestinian representative groups as either straw men or as scapegoats or as nemesis or whatever's politically convenient. And that's the lesson, right? Where the Palestinian people don't have a respectable, serious, elected representative body, and therefore
not their fault.
Not their fault.
Not their fault.
Whereas Israel is then continuing to leverage and use that in the narrative, in the media, in the cycle, because then they can claim credibility because they are the functioning democracy who is fighting for what, again, from their perspective, is
they
right.
learn from the best. They learn from us. Let's pick up that. Let's take that next comment up there and bring that up. That next comment.
What will you do about it, Mr. Boston? I can read the comments. I know. I didn't. That's why I don't post. I don't talk about this stuff because it's like, what is talking about it going to do? There's layers to this, but I appreciate the comments in the chat. If you want to ask some questions,
Mr. Boston. Mr. Boston is a little bit. Mr. Boston can be very hard. But I mean, that's the truth. What are we doing about it? We're having discussions about it. We're bringing people aware to it. We're having being adults about it. That's the first thing we need to do. And we need to show by example that people who disagree about things can sit in a room like adults and have conversations and not participate in cancel culture. That's the first part. Then we're having other ideas out there to recognize the problem. Listen, if you want to help me out and figure out a way that we can stop all this stuff, I'm all for it. I'm an election integrity activist because I believe that if we don't have a mechanism that represents our true democracy, and we can't hire people that we need to hire, and we can't fire people that we need to fire, and we don't have that mechanism, we're lost. We don't have elections, we have selections. But really quickly, put up Netanyahu's comment over here just to reiterate, right? Move the big old things. Statement from the Prime Minister's office. The War Cabinet unanimously decided this evening Israel will continue in its operation in Rafah in order to apply military pressure on Hamas so as to advance the release of our hostages and achieve the other objectives of the war. And this is what Khaleesi put up there. If Israel had agreed to a ceasefire today, they would have freed the hostages. Instead, Netanyahu chose to bomb Rafah. Israel does not want a ceasefire. Israel does not want to free hostages. Israel wants to murder every last Palestinian so it can occupy that land. It's hard to argue with Khaleesi here. I mean, they could have had a ceasefire. They could have had a deal done, but they didn't want a deal. Like I said, it seems like they have a different objective than what they're telling us, right? Like they're telling us they want Hamas. You stated earlier, that's going after an ideology. That's not going to happen. It's ridiculous. Not to even mention the Hamas is dug in like an Alabama tick. They're underground. They're not getting hit. The IDF is not used to fighting that war. They're going in there at night. They're popping out of tunnels, getting sniped, boom, 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 and going back down in. This is like guerrilla warfare.
This last part that we don't hear about is the tolls, the casualties on the IDF side, but the Israelis, that's what they see in their newspaper, right? Yeah. The devotion, the memorials of all the soldiers, the IDF soldiers who are dying. Yeah. And so it's not just civilians, Palestinian civilians who are dying, right? Yeah. Definitely that is the majority of people who are dying. Palestinian civilians. There are a few Hamas soldiers being killed. I don't know if there's a reliable number.
I never even see pictures of them.
But on the Israeli side, what do they see? They don't see the Palestinian children. They see the IDF soldiers that are getting popped off when they pop out because this Hamas is a serious militant organization that is
been training for this their whole lives. The people who are in Hamas have lost family members. They got nothing much more to live for, so they're ready to fight. And
serious jihadists, right? You don't want to be on the wrong side of that battle.
No,
and so there's a reality to the situation that when people on your side get killed, it doesn't matter if it's in a war, if it's justified or not. Yeah. When people are on your side, you dig in more.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, now we really got to get them. Look at all the people on our side that they killed.
Yes.
Now we got to kill more of them. I mean, I think that's human mentality. I try to step back and away from
that. Yeah, but
that,
if you combine that with what's been going on for Israel for years, they get the empire education like we do. Like we've been taught in all high school and middle school that we're United States empire goes around fighting for human rights. We're like Captain America.
We're on the good side of every war.
It's like, we're on Star Wars, like, we're Luke and the rebels, and no, they get it all wrong. And that's the same thing that happens in Israel. You see people out there, young children going, he's a terrorist just because he's a Palestinian. He's a terrorist. You see that on a regular basis. You see little kids getting arrested on a regular basis. The reason why they wanted to shut down TikTok was not because it was the Chinese. It was because Israel was getting their ass handed to them. I stand with Palestine. Free Palestine was one of the most watched, used hashtag out there, while I stand with Israel was down in the dust. It was really hurting them when it came to their propaganda war, right? They lost the public opinion out there. They lost the public. They had it on October 7th because a lot of people were pointing at Hamas and they were sympathetic to Israel, but they lost it after their behavior since October 7th. It's been awful. It's been brutal. It's been terrible. Anything else before we take a quick break on this subject over here? You want to close with? How do you think this is going to end? How do you think this is going to end?
Unfortunately, it's not, and it's not going to end soon. And in the meantime, more people are going to die. Innocents are going to die. Soldiers are going to die. Natural resources are going to be degraded. More trauma is going to be built up and passed on to the next generation if it survives. All of these things are going on. And so, I mean, the closing thought is we're in a civilizational battle, and we need to have more discussion, diplomacy, and pressure on the aggressors to stop.
Yeah, listen. Like I said, we keep handing these people fucking the missiles to do all this dirty work here. It's terrible. And half our Congress has got dual citizenship with Israel. Some of those, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, was like, is Ukraine the 51st state? I asked her, is Israel the 51st state? You can't be America first if you're going to be Israel first. That's my final thought.